Welcome to a special late night stream where we will be reading The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. I know the bare minimum about this story. I know it is considered the origin or one of the origins for the concept of, I suppose you could call it mimetic horror. The idea that an idea itself can be the horror, that it can infest your mind and work its way through to become the vehicle of your ruination. But I actually found this video. I've heard a lot about The King in Yellow, but I've never had a chance to read it. But I hope to fix that today on stream. So let us get some glasses on. And you know what? Let's just jump into it. God, it's an old book, but that's also how you know it's free domain. Meaning I can read it online for free. Let me double check my glasses. I can't read without my glasses. Okay. The story, a story that inspired much of modern horror, even the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who himself, went on to inspire all sorts of works. It is none other than The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. Original publication date, 1895. The King in Yellow is dedicated to my brother. I didn't know that he dedicated to his brother. Let me make sure it's all reading correctly. It is, so let's just go right into it. Along the shore the cloud waves break. The twin suns sink behind the lake. The shadows lengthen in Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise, and strange moons circle through the skies. But stranger still is lost Carcosa. Songs that Hades shall sing, where flap the tethers of the king, must die unheard in dim Carcosa. Song of my soul, my voice is dead. Die thou unsung, as tears unshed shall dry and die in lost Carcosa. Casilda's Song in The King in Yellow, Act 1, Scene 2. Hello, Opus. You are just in time for the start. We just read the opening poem of the collection. But Repairer of Reputation. That is French. I do not know French, but I'll try my best for you, chat. Ne relance pas les fous. Leur folie dure plus longtemps que la nôtre. Voilà toute la différence. Toward the end of the year 1920, the government of the United States had practically completed the program adopted during the last month of President Winthrop's administration. The country was apparently tranquil. Everybody knows how the tariff and labor questions were settled. The war with Germany, incident on the country's seizure of the Samoa Islands, had left no visible scars upon the Republic. Bonjour to you as well, Kais. And the temporary occupation of Norfolk by the invading army had been forgotten in the joy over repeated naval victories and the subsequent ridiculous plight of General von Gartenlaub's forces in the state of New Jersey. The Cuban and Hawaiian investments had paid 100%, and the territory of Samoa was well worth its cost as a coaling station. The country was in a superb state of defense. Every coast city had been well supplied with land fortifications. The army, under the parental eye of General Staff, organized according to the Prussian system, had been increased to 300,000 men, with a territorial reserve of 1 million, and 6 magnificent squadrons of cruisers and battleships patrolled the 6 stations of the navigable seas, leaving a steam reserve aptly fitted to control home waters. The gentlemen from the West had at last been constrained to acknowledge that a college for the training of diplomats was unnecessary, as law schools as for the training of barristers. Consequently, we were no longer represented abroad by incompetent patriots. The nation was prosperous. Chicago, for a moment paralyzed after a second Great Fire, just another day in the Midwest, had risen from its ruins, white and imperial, and more beautiful than the white city which had been built in its for its plaything in 1893. Everywhere, good architecture was replacing bad, and even in New York, a sudden craving for decency had swept away a great portion of the existing horrors. Streets had been widened, properly paved and lighted, trees had been planted, squares laid out, elevated structures demolished, and underground roads built to replace them. The new government buildings and barracks were fine bits of architecture, and the long system of stone quays which completely surrounded the island had been turned into parks, which proved a godsend to the population. The subsidizing of the State Theater and the State Opera brought its own reward. The United States National Academy of Design was much like European institutions of the same kind. Hello, Lan. We are very early on, so you have not missed much. We're just in the description of the world. We're just establishing the setting. Ooh. Government did it. Nobody envied the Secretary of Fine Arts, either his cabinet position or his portfolio. The Secretary of Forestry and Game Preservation had a much easier time thanks to the new system of national mounted police. We had profited well by the last treaties with France and England, the exclusion of foreign-born Jews as a measure of self-preservation, the settlement of new independent Negro state of Suwannee, the checking of immigration, the new laws concerning naturalization, and the gradual centralization of power in the executive all contributed to national calm and prosperity. When the government solved the Indian problem, I think he means Native American. I don't think he means all the way over at India. The squadrons of Indian cavalry, yes, scouts in native costume were substituted for the pitiable organizations tacked on to the tail of skeletonized regiments by a former Secretary of War. How yellow is yellow? I don't know. The picture in the corner, our thumbnail, that's how yellow. One sec. The nation drew a long sigh of relief when, after the colossal congress of religions, bigotry and intolerance were laid in their graves, the kindness and charity began to draw warring sects together. Many thought the millennium had arrived, at least in the new world, which after all is a world by itself. So it feels like it's setting up a false utopia, but let's read into that before we make assumptions. But self-preservation is the first law, and the United States had to look on in helpless sorrow as Germany, Italy, Spain, and Belgium writhed in the throes of anarchy, while Russia, watching from the Caucasus, stooped and bound them one by one. In the city of New York, the summer of 1899 was signalized by the dismantling of the elevated roadways. The summer of 1900 will live in memories of New York people for many a cycle. The Dodge statue was removed in that year. In the following winter began the agitation for the repeal of the laws prohibiting, can't say that word, self-ending, which bore its final fruit in the month of April 1920, when the first government lethal chamber was opened on Washington Square. Okay, yeah, it is a false utopia. Real utopias don't have that, don't have Soylent Green, or Futurama, self-ending booths. I had walked down that day from Dr. Archer's house on Madison Avenue, where I had been as a mere formality. Ever since that fall from my horse 4 years before, I had been troubled at times with pains in the back of my head and neck, but now for months they had been absent, and the doctor sent me away that day, saying there was nothing more to be cured in me. It was hardly worth his fee to be told that. I knew it myself. Still, I did not grudge him the money. What I minded was the mistake which he made at first, when they picked me up from the pavement when I lay unconscious, and somebody had mercifully sent a bullet through my horse's head. I was carried to Dr. Archer, and he, pronouncing my brain affected, placed me in his private asylum, where I was obliged to endure treatment for insanity. At first he decided that I was well, and I, knowing that my mind had always been as sound as his, if not sounder, paid my tuition, as he jokingly called it, and left. I told him, smiling, that I would get even with him for his mistake, and he laughed heartily and asked me to call once in a while. I did so, hoping for a chance to even up accounts, but he gave me none, and I told him I would wait. I thought I misread that. I thought you said, I am late. Don't worry, we've just established the setting, and we just established the fact that the point of view character had a head injury, and during his recovery for his head injury, he was in an asylum. Ooh. And he's very bitter at the doctor who put him in the asylum. So now you're caught up. The fall from my horse had fortunately left no evil results. On the contrary, it had changed my whole character for the better. From a lazy young man about town, I had become active, energetic, temperate, and above all else, ambitious. There was only one thing which troubled me. I laughed at my uneasiness, and yet it troubled me. Also welcome, Switch. During my convalescence, During my convalescence, I had bought and read for the first time The King in Yellow. I remember after finishing the first act that it occurred to me that I had better stop. I started up and flung the book into the fireplace. The volume struck the barred gate and fell open on the hearth in the firelight. If I had not caught a glimpse of the opening words of the second act, I should never have finished it. But as I stooped to pick it up, my eyes became riveted to the open page, and with a cry of terror, or perhaps it was of joy so poignant that I suffered in every nerve, I snatched the thing out of the coals and crept shaking to my bedroom, where I read it and reread it, and wept and laughed and trembled with a horror which at times assails me yet. This is the thing that troubles me, for I cannot forget Carcosa, where black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon when the twin suns sink into the lake of Halley. and my mind will bear forever the memory of pallid mask. I pray, but I pray God will curse the writer as the writer has cursed the world with this beautiful, stupendous creation, terrible in its simplicity, irresistible in its truth, a world which now trembles before the King in Yellow. When the French government seized the translated copies, which had just arrived in Paris, London, of course, because eager to read it, of course, became eager to read it. It is well known how the book spread like an infectious disease from city to city, from continent to continent, barred out here, confiscated there, denounced by press and pulpit, and censored even by the most advanced of literary anarchists. No definite principles had been violated in those wicked pages, no doctrine promulgated, no convictions outraged. It could not be judged by any known standard, yet, although it was acknowledged that the supreme note of art had been struck in the King in Yellow, all felt that human nature could not bear the strain, nor thrive on words in which the essence of purest poison lurked. The very banality and innocence of the first act only allowed the blow to fall afterward with more awful effect. It was, I remember, the 13th day of April 1920. The first government lethal chamber was established on the south side of Washington Square between Wooster Street and South Fifth Avenue. A block which had formerly consisted of a lot of shabby old buildings used as cafes and restaurants for foreigners, had been acquired by the government in the winter of 1898. The French and the Italian cafes and restaurants were torn down. The whole block was enclosed by a gilded iron railing and converted into a lovely garden with lawns, flowers, and fountains. In the center of the garden stood a small white building, severely classical in architecture and surrounded by thickets of flowers. 6 iconic columns supported the roof and a single door of bronze. A splendid marble group of the Fates stood before the door, and the work of a young American sculptor, Boris Yevon, who had died in Paris when only 23 years old. The inauguration ceremonies were in progress. As I crossed University Place and entered the square, I threaded my way through the... Sorry, lost my plate. I threaded my way through the silent throng of spectators, but was stopped at 4th Street by a cordon of police. A regiment of United States Lancers were drawn up in a hollow square around the lethal chamber. On a raised tribune facing Washington Park stood the government of New York, and behind him were grouped not the government, stood the governor of New York, and behind him were grouped the mayor of New York and Brooklyn, the inspector general of police, the commandant of the state troops, Colonel Livingston, military aide to the President of the United States, General Blount, commanding at the Governor's Island, Major General Hamilton commanding the garrison of New York and Brooklyn, Admiral Buffby of the Fleet of the North River, Surgeon General Lansford, the staff of the National Free Hospital, Senators Wyss and Franklin of New York, and the Commissioner of Public Works. The tribune was surrounded by a squadron of hussars of the National Guard. The governor was finishing his reply to the short speech of the Surgeon General. I heard him say, "The laws prohibiting self-termination and providing punishment for any attempt at self-destruction have been repealed. The government has seen fit to acknowledge the right of man to end an existence which may have become intolerable to him through physical suffering or mental despair. It is believed that the community will be benefited by the removal of such people from their midst. Since the passage of this law, the number of self-terminations," I lost my place, "in the United States has not increased. Now the government has determined to establish a lethal chamber in every city, town, and village in the country. It remains to be seen whether or not that class of human creature from whose desponding ranks new victims of self-destruction fall daily will accept the relief thus provided." He paused and turned to the white lethal chamber. The silence of the street was absolute. There a painless death awaits him who can no longer bear the sorrows of this life. If death is welcome, let him seek it there. Then quickly turning to the military aide of the president's household, he said, "I declare the lethal chamber open!" And again, facing the vast crowd, he cried in a clear voice, "Citizens of New York and the United States of America, through me, the government declares the lethal chamber to be open." The solemn hush was broken by a sharp cry of command. The squadron of hussars filed after the governor's carriage. The lancers wheeled and formed along Fifth Avenue to wait for the commandant of the garrison, and the Mount Police followed them. I left the crowd to gape and stare at the white marble death chamber, and crossing South Fifth Avenue, walked along the western side of the thoroughfare to Bleecker Street. I feel like a death chamber's pretty bleak already. Oh, spelled different. Then I turned to the right and stopped before a dingy shop which bore the sign, "Hobart Armorer." I glanced in at the doorway and saw. I just made a realization. Is this an old? I know it's like supposed to be like a future from when it was published, but this might also be an alternate timeline as well. I just realized this story. Because Armorer doesn't really seem relevant in the 1920s. Or even in the late 1800s. Do they not have guns? Okay, we'll look into that. Let's keep an eye out for that. I glanced in the doorway and saw Hobart busy in his little shop at the end of the hall. He looked up and, catching sight of me, cried in a deep, hearty voice, "Come in, Mr. Castigane." Constance, his daughter, rose to meet me as I crossed the threshold and held out her pretty hand, but I saw the blush of disappointment on her cheeks and knew it was another cardigan she had expected, my cousin Louis. I smiled at her confusion and complimented her on the banner she was embroidering for the colored plate. Old Hobart sat riveting the worn greaves of some ancient suit of armor. Oh no, he's just a refurbisher then. Okay, maybe it's not. Well, it is an alternate timeline, but it's not an alternate history. Maybe. Ooh. Some ancient armor, and the ting, ting, ting of his little hammer sounded pleasantly in the quaint shop. Presently, he dropped his hammer and fussed about for a moment with a tiny wrench. The soft class of the mail sent a thrill of pleasure through me. Okay. I loved to hear the music of steel brushing against steel, the mellow shock of the mallet on thigh pieces, the jingle of chain armor. That was the only reason I went to see Hobart. He had never interested me personally, nor did Constance, except for the fact that her being in love with Louis. This did occupy my attention, and sometimes even kept me awake at night. Oh, I'm gonna sneeze 1 minute. Okay, I'm better. Sorry about that. But I knew in my heart that all would come right. That I should arrange their future as I expected to arrange that of my kind doctor, John Archer. However, I should never have troubled myself about visiting them just then, had it not been, as I say, that the music of the tickling hammer had for me this strong fascination. I would sit for hours listening and listening, and when the stray sunbeam struck the inlaid steel, the sensation it gave me was almost too keen to endure. My eyes would become fixated, dilated with a pleasure that stretched every nerve almost to breaking, until some movement of the old armorer cut off the ray of sunlight. Then, still thrilling secretly, I leaned back and listened again to the sound of the polishing rag, swish, 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 rubbing rust from the rivets. Ooh. Ooh. Oh, thank you for the W stream, thank you. And welcome, Biggie. Welcome, Biggie Smalls. Constance worked with the embroidery over her knees, now and then pausing to examine more closely the pattern in the colored plate from the Metropolitan Museum. "Who is this for?" I asked. Hobart explained that in addition to the treasures of armors in the Metropolitan Museum, of which he had been appointed armorer, he also had charge of several collections belonging to rich amateurs. This was the missing greaves of a famous suit, which a client of his had traced to a little shop in Paris, on the Quai d'Orsay. I don't know French. He, Hobart, had negotiated for and secured the greave, and now the suit was complete. He laid down his hammer and read me the history of the suit, traced since 1450, from the owner to owner, until it was acquired by Thomas Stainbridge. When his superb collection was sold, this client of Hobart's bought the suit, and since then the search for the missing greave had been pushed until it was almost by accident located in Paris. Did you continue the search so persistently without any certainty of the greave being still in existence?" I demanded. "Of course," he replied coolly. Then, for the first time, I took a personal interest in Hobart. "It was worth something to you," I ventured. "No," he replied, laughing. My pleasure is finding it was my reward." "Have you no ambition to be rich?" I asked, smiling. "My own ambition is to be best armorer in the world," he answered gravely. Constant asked me if I had seen the ceremonies of the lethal chamber. She herself had noticed cavalry passing by Broadway that morning and had wished to see the inauguration, but her father wanted the banner finished, and she had stayed at his request. Did you see did you see your cousin, Mr. Castaigne? Did you see your cousin, Mr. Castaigne, there? She asked, with the slightest tremor of her soft eyelashes. No, I replied carelessly. Louis's regiment is maneuvering out in Westchester County. I rose and picked up my hat and cane. Are you going upstairs to see the lunatic again? Laughed old Hobbart. If Hobbart knew how I loathe that word lunatic, he would never use it in my presence. It rouses certain feelings within me which I do not care to explain. However, I answered him quickly. I think I shall drop in and see Mr. Wilde for a moment or two. Poor fellow. Oh no, poor fellow, said Constance, with a shake of her head. It must be hard to live alone year after year, poor, crippled, and almost demented. It is very good for you, Mr. Castaigne. I don't know why I'm messing up the name. To visit him as often as you do. I think he is vicious, observed Hobbit, beginning again with his hammer. I listened to the golden tinkle on the greave plates. When he had finished, I replied, No, he is not vicious, nor is he in the least demented. His mind is a wonder chamber, from which he can extract treasures that you and I would give years of our life to acquire. Hobbit laughed. I continued a little impatiently. He knows history as no one else could know it. Nothing, however trivial, escapes his search, and his memory is so absolute, so precise in details that were it known in New York that such a man existed, the people could not honor him enough. Nonsense, muttered Hobbit, searching the floor for fallen rivet. Is it nonsense? I asked, managing to suppress what I felt. Is it nonsense when he says that the Tassets and the Cusiards of the enameled suit of armor commonly known as the Prince Emblazoned, dumbass. The Prince Emblazoned can be found among a mass of rusty theatrical properties, broken stoves, and rag pickers refuse in garret in Pell Street. Hobbart's hammer fell to the ground, but he picked it up and asked with great deal of calm how I knew that the Tassets and Lefcusards were missing from the Prince Emblazoned. I did not know until Mr. Wilde mentioned it to me the other day. He said they were in the garret of 998 Pell Street. Nonsense, he cried, but I noticed his hand trembling under his leathern apron. Is this nonsense too? I asked pleasantly. Is it nonsense when Mr. Wilde continually speaks of you as the Marquis of Avonshire and of his Miss Constance? I did not finish, for Constance had started to her feet with terror written on every feature. Hobbit looked at me and slowly smoothed his leathern apron. That is impossible, he observed. Mr. Wilde may know a great many things. About armor, for instance, and the Prince Emblazoned. I interposed, smiling. Yes, he continued slowly. About armor also he also may be but he is wrong in regard to the Marquis of Avonshire, who, as you know, killed his wife, Traducer, years ago, and went to Australia, where he did not long survive his wife. Mr. Wilde is wrong, murmured Constance. Her lips were blanched, but her voice was sweet and calm. Let us agree, if you please, that in this one circumstance, Mr. Wilde is wrong. End of chapter 1. Let me get a drink or two before we continue. Chapter 2. I climbed the three dilapidated flights of stairs which I had so often climbed before, and knocked at a small door at the end of the corridor. Mr. Wilde opened the door and I walked in. When he had double locked the door and pushed a heavy chest against it, he came and sat down beside me, peering up into my face with his little light-colored eyes. Half a dozen new scratches covered his nose and cheeks, and the silver wires which supported his artificial ears had become displaced. Actually, let me double check. Okay. Want to look at something real quick? Okay. I thought I had never seen him so hideously fascinating. He had no ears, the artificial ones which now stood out at an angle from the fine wires were his one weakness. They were made of wax and painted in a shell pink, but the rest of his face was yellow. He might better have reveled in the luxury of some artificial fingers for his left hand, which was absolutely fingerless, but it seemed to cause him no inconvenience, and he was satisfied with his wax ears. He was very small, scarcely higher than a child of 10, but his arms were magnificently developed, and his thighs were as thick as any athlete's. Still, the most remarkable thing about Mr. Wilde was that a man of his marvelous intelligence and knowledge should have such a head. It was flat and pointed, like the heads of many of those unfortunate whom the people in prison, in asylums for the weak-minded. Many called him insane, but I knew him to be as sane as I was. I do not deny that he was eccentric. The mania had for keeping the cat and teasing her until she flew at his face like a demon was certainly eccentric. I never could understand why he kept the creature, nor what pleasure he found in shutting himself up in this room with this surely vicious beast. I remembered once glancing up from the manuscript I was studying by the light of some tallow dips, and seeing Mr. Wilde squatting motionless on his high chair, his eyes fairly blazing with excitement, while the cat, which had risen from her place before the stove, came creeping across the floor right at him. Before I could move, she flattened her belly to the ground, crouched, trembled, and sprang into his face, howling and foaming. They rolled over and over on the floor, scratching and clawing until the cat screamed and fled under the cabinet, and Mr. Wilde turned over on his back, his limb contracting and curling up like the legs of a dying spider. He was eccentric. Understatement. Ooh, don't worry. We have a tendency to lose our head around here. But, as a Dullahan, It always comes back. Mr. Wilde had climbed into his high chair and, after studying my face, picked up a dog's-eared ledger and opened it. Henry B. Matthews, he read. That's a little too Irish. Let's get rid of the Irish accent. Henry B. Matthews, he read. Bookkeeper with the Wysott and Company, dealers in church ornaments, called April 3rd, reputation damaged on the racetrack, known as Welch, reputation to be repaired by August 1st, retainer $5. He returned the page and ran his fingerless knuckles down the closely written columns. P. Green Dusenberry, minister of the gospel, Fair Beach, New Jersey, reputation damaged in Bowery, to be repaired as soon as possible, retainer $100. He coughed and added, called April 6th. Then you are not in need of money, Mr. Wilde? I inquired. Listen, he coughed. Mrs. C. Hamilton, Chester of Chester Park, New York City, called April 7th, reputation damaged at Dieppe, France, to be repaired by October 1st, retainer $500. Note: C. Hamilton, Chester, Captain USS Avalanche, ordered home from South Sea Squadron, October 1st. Well, I said, the profession of a repairer of reputation is lucrative. His colorless eyes sought mine. I only want to demonstrate that I was correct. You said it was impossible to succeed as a repairer of reputation. That even if I did succeed, in certain cases it would cost me more than I would gain by it. Today, I have 500 men in my employ who are poorly paid, but who pursue the work with enthusiasm which possible may be born of fear. These men enter every shade and grade of society. Some even are pillars of the most exclusive social temples. Others are the prop and pride of the financial world. Still others hold undisputed sway among the fancy and the talent. I choose them at my leisure from those who reply to my advertisements. It is easy enough. They are all cowards. I could treble the number of 20 days if I wished. Treble, not tremble. I could treble the number of 20 days if I wished. So you see, those who have in their keeping the reputations of their fellow citizens, I have in my pay. They may turn on you, I suggested. He rubbed his thumb over his cropped ears and adjusted the wax substitutes. I think not, he murmured thoughtfully. I seldom have to apply the whip, and then only once besides. They like their wages. Well, it sounds like, I think this guy's he's a reputation repairer, but how he's doing it is he's getting agents by his former clients and blackmailing them is what I'm kind of thinking is happening here. How do you apply the whip? I demanded. His face for a moment was awful to look upon. His eyes dwindled to a pair of green sparks. I invite them to come and have a little chat with me, he said in a soft voice. A knock at his door, maybe I'm assuming too much when I say that, but a knock at the door interrupted him, and his face resumed its amiable expression. Who is it? He inquired. Mr. Stalet. These names. Was the answer. Come tomorrow, he replied Mr. Wilde. Impossible, began the other, but was silenced by a sort of bark from Mr. Wilde. Come tomorrow, he repeated. We heard somebody move away from the door and turn the corner by the stairway. Who was that? I asked. Arnold Stalet, owner and editor-in-chief of the great New York Daily. He drummed on the ledger of his fingerless hand, adding, I pay him very badly, but he thinks it is a good bargain. Arnold Stalet? I repeated, amazed. Yes, said Mr. Wilde, with a self-satisfied cough. The cat, which had entered the room as he spoke, hesitated, looked up at him, and snarled. He climbed down from his chair and squatting on the floor, took the creature into his arms and caressed her. The cat ceased snarling and presently began a loud purring, which seemed to increase in timbre as he stroked her. Where are the notes? I asked. He pointed to the table, and for the 100th time I picked up the bundle of manuscripts entitled The Imperial Dynasty of America. One by one I studied the well-worn pages, worn only by my own handling, and although I knew all by heart from the beginning, when from Carcosa, the Hyades, Hashta, and Aldebaran to the Castain Louis de Calvados, born December 19th, 1877. I read it with eager, rapt attention, pausing to repeat part of it aloud, and dwelling especially on the Hildred de Calvados, only son of Hildred Castain and Edith Ladys Castain, first in succession, etc., etc. When I finished, Mr. Wilde nodded and coughed. Speaking of your legitimate ambition, he said, how do Constance and Louis get along? She loves him, I replied simply. The cat on his knees suddenly turned and struck at his eyes, and he flung her off and climbed on the chair opposite me. And Dr. Archer, but that's a matter you can settle any time you wish. He added. Yes, I replied. Dr. Archer can wait, but it is time I saw my cousin Louis. Ooh. It is time, he repeated. Then he took another ledger from the table and ran over the leaves rapidly. We are now in communication with 10,000 men, he muttered. We can count on 100,000 within the first 28 hours. And in 48 hours, the state will rise en masse. The country follows the state. And the portion that will not, I mean California and the Northwest, might better never have been inhabited. I shall not send them the yellow sign. The blood rushed to my head, but I only answered, a new broom sweeps clean. The ambition of Caesar and of Napoleon pales before that which could not rest until it had seized the minds of men and controlled even their unborn thoughts, said Mr. Wilde. You are speaking of the King in Yellow, I groaned with a shudder. He is a king whom emperors have served. I am content to serve him, I replied. Mr. Wilde sat rubbing his eyes with his crippled hand. Perhaps Constance does not love him, he suggested. I started to reply, but a sudden burst of military music from the street below drowned my voice. The 20th Dragoon Regiment, formerly in garrison at Mount St. Vincent was returning from the maneuvers in Westchester County to its new barracks on East Washington Square. It was my cousin's regiment. They were a fine lot of fellows, in their pale blue, tight-fitting jackets, jaunty busbies, and white riding breeches, with the double yellow stripe, into which their limbs seemed molded. Every other squadron was armed with lances, from the metal points of which flooded yellow and white pennons. The band passed playing the regimental march. Then came the colonel and the staff, the horses crowding and trampling while their heads bobbed in unison, and the pennons fluttered from their lance points. The troops who rode with the beautiful English seat looked brown as berries from their bloodless campaign among the farms of Westchester, and the music of their sabers against the stirrups, and the jingle of the spurs and the carbines was delightful to me. I saw Louis riding with his squadron. He was as handsome an officer as I had ever seen. Mr. Wilde, who had mounted a chair by the window, saw him too, but said nothing. Louis turned and looked. Why do I keep calling him Louis instead of Louis? Because France, and that was on my brain. Louis turned and looked straight at Hobbart's shop as he passed, and I could see the flush on his brown cheeks. I think Constance must have been at the window when the last troopers had clattered by, and the last pennants vanished into South Fifth Avenue. Mr. Wilde clambered out of his chair and dragged the wet chest away from the door. "Yes," he said, "it is time that you saw your cousin Louis." When did we start? How deep are we? Okay. We're an hour in. I feel like we should have been making more progress by now. He unlocked the door, and I picked up my hat and stick and stepped into the corridor. The stairs were dark. Groping about, I set my foot on something soft, which snarled and spit, and I aimed a murderous blow at the cat, but my cane shivered to splinters against the balustrade, and the beast scurried back into Mr. Wilde's room. Passing Hobbart's door again, I saw him still work on the armor, but I did not stop, and stepping out into Bleecker Street, I followed it to Worcester, skirted the grounds of the lethal chamber, and crossing Washington Park, went straight to my rooms in Benedict. Here I lunched comfortably, read the Herald and the media, and finally went to the steel safe in my bedroom and set the time combination. The 3 3/4 minutes which it is necessary to wait while the time lock is opening are to me golden moments. From the instant I set the combination to the moment when I grasp the knobs and swing back the solid steel door, I live in an ecstasy of expectation. Those moments must be like moments passed in paradise. I know what I am to find in the end of the time limit. I know what the massive safe holds secure for me alone, and the exquisite pleasure of waiting is hardly enhanced when the safe opens and I lift from its velvet crown a diadem of purest gold, blazing with diamonds. I do this every day, and yet the joy of waiting and at last touching again the diadem, only seems to increase as the days pass. It is a diadem of fit for a king among kings, an emperor among emperors. The king in yellow might scorn it, but it shall be worn by his royal servant. Gonna take a drink? I held it in my arm until the alarm of the safe rang harshly, and then tenderly, proudly, I replaced it and shut the steel doors. I walked slowly back into my study. I lost my... which faces Washington Square, and leaned on the windowsill. Afternoon sun poured into my windows, and a gentle breeze stirred the branches of the elms and maples in the park, now covered with buds of tender foliage. A flock of pigeons circled about the tower of Memorial Church, sometimes alighting on the purple tiled roof, sometimes wheeling downward to the that's an L, lotus fountain in front of the marbled arch. The gardeners were busy with flower beds around the fountain, and the freshly turned earth smelled sweet and spicy. A lawn mower drawn by a fat white horse clipped across the green sward, and watering carts poured showers of spray over the asphalt drives. Around the statue of Peter Stuyvesant, which in 1897 had replaced the monstrosity supposed to represent Garibaldi. Children played in the spring sunshine, and nurse girls wheeled elaborate baby carriages with a reckless disregard for the pasty-faced occupants, which could probably be explained by the presence of a half-dozen trim dragoon troopers languidly lolling on the benches. Through the trees, the Washington Memorial Arch glistened like silver in the sunshine, and beyond, on the eastern extremity of the square, the gray stone barracks of the dragoons and the white granite artillery stables were alive with color and motion. I looked at the lethal chamber on the corner of the square opposite. A few curious people still lingered about the gilded iron railing, but inside the grounds the paths were deserted. I watched the fountains ripple and sparkle. The sparrows had already found this new bathing nook, and the basins were covered with the dusty feathered little things. 2 or 3 white peacocks picked their way across the lawns, and a drab-colored pigeon sat so motionless on the arm of one of the fates that it seemed to be part of the sculptured stone. Garibaldi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. The guy likes to use, I mean, I know Garibaldi is a real name, but with the other names in this, the original names in the story, those ones keep throwing me off. As I was turning carelessly away, a slight commotion in a group of curious loiterers around the gates attracted my attention. A young man had entered and was advancing with nervous strides along the gravel path which leads to the bronze doors of the lethal chamber. He paused a moment before the fates, and as he raised his head to those 3 mysterious faces, the pigeon rose from its sculptured perch, circled about for a moment, and wheeled to the east. The young man pressed his hand to his face, and then, with an undefiable gesture, sprang up, The marble steps, the bronze door closed behind him, and half an hour later the loiterers slouched away, and the frightened pigeon returned to its perch in the arms of fate. Oh yeah. I forgot about that clip. The Garibaldi Furumoco. That's where I've heard the name before. I mean, I should have heard the name somewhere else because I'm pretty sure it's an actual artist, but that's neither here nor there. I'm pretty stupid. Ooh. Oof. I put on my hat and went out into the park for a little walk before dinner. As I crossed the central driveway, a group of officers passed. Sorry, I was making sure I didn't skip anything. Passed, and one of them called out, "Hello, Hildred," and came back to shake hands with me. It was my cousin Louis. He stood smiling and tapping his spurred heels with his riding whip. "Just back from Westchester," he said. "But during the bucolic, milk and curds, you know, dairy maids in sunbonnets who say, hey, and how, whatever. And I don't think when you tell them they are pretty. I'm nearly dead from the square meal of Delmonico's. What's the news?" "There is none," I replied pleasantly. "I saw your regiment coming in this morning." "Did you? I didn't see you. Where were you?" "In Mr. Wilde's window." "Oh, hell," he began impatiently. "That man is stark mad. I don't understand why you—" He saw how annoyed I felt by his outburst and begged my pardon. "Really, old chap," he said, "I don't mean to run down a man like you, but for the life of me, I can't see what the deuce you find in common with Mr. Wilde. He's not well bred, to put it generously. He is hideously deformed. His head is the head of a criminally insane person. You know, oh, sorry, I hit my mic. You know yourself, he's been in an asylum. So have I interrupted calmly. Louis looked startled and confused for a moment, but recovered and slapped me heartily on the shoulder. "You were completely cured," he began, but I stopped him again. "I suppose you mean I was simply acknowledged to never have been insane." "Of course, that's what I meant," he laughed. I just like his laugh because I knew it was forced, but I nodded gaily and asked him where he was going. Louis looked after his brother officers, who had now almost reached Broadway. Sorry, oof. We had intended to sample Brunswick cocktail, but to tell you the truth, I was anxious for an excuse to go and see Hobart instead. Come along, I'll make you my excuse. We found old Hobart neatly attired in a fresh spring suit standing at the door of his shop and sniffing the air. Okay. Sniffing the air, okay. "I had just decided to take Constance for a little stroll before dinner," he replied to the impetuous volley of questions from Louis. "We thought of walking on the park terrace along the North River." Yeah, he replied to the volley of questions from Louis, so it must be Hobart talking. At the moment, Constance appeared and grew pale and rosy by turns as Louis bent over her small gloved fingers. I tried to excuse myself, alleging an engagement uptown, but Louis and Constance would not listen, and I saw I was expected to remain and engage old Hobart's attention. After all, it would be just as well if I kept my eyes on Louis, I thought, and when they hailed a Spring Street horse car, I got in after them and took my seat beside the armorer. The beautiful line of parks and granite terraces overlooking the wharves along the North River, which were built in 1910 and finished in the autumn of 1917, had become one of the most popular promenades in the metropolis. They extended from the Battery of the 190th Street, overlooking the noble river and affording a fine view of Jersey Shore and the highlands opposite. Cafes and restaurants were scattered here and there among the trees, and twice a week military bands from the garrison played in the kiosks of the parapets. We sat down in the sunshine on the bench at the foot of the equestrian statue of General Sheridan. Constance tipped her sunshade to shield her eyes, and she and Louis began a murmuring conversation which was impossible to catch. Old Hobart, leaning on his ivory-headed cane, lighted an excellent cigar. I keep getting distracted. The mate to which I politely refused, and smiled at vacancy. The sun hung low above the Satin Island woods, and the bay was dyed with golden hues, reflecting from the sunward sails of the shipping in the harbor. Brigs, schooners, yachts, clumsy ferry boats, their decks swarming with people, railroads, transports carrying lines of brown, blue, and white freight cars, stately and sound steamers, declasse tramp steamers, coasters, dredgers, scows, and everywhere pervading the entire bay, impudent little tugs puffing and whistling officiously. These were the craft which churned the sunlight waters as far as the eye could reach. In calm contrast to the hurry of sailing vessels and steamers, a silent fleet of white warships lay motionless in the midstream. Constance's merry laugh aroused me from my reverie. "What are you staring at?" she inquired. "Nothing. The fleet." I smiled. Then Louis told us what the vessels were, pointing out each by its relative position to the old red fort of Governor's Island. The little cigar-shaped thing is a torpedo boat," he explained. "There are 4 more lying close together. They are the Tarpon, the Falcon, the Sea Fox, and the Octopus. The gunboats just above are the Princeton, the Chaplain, the Stillwater, and the Erie. Next to them lie the cruisers Farragut, don't say that 3 times fast, and Los Angeles. And above them, the battleship California and Dakota and Washington, which is the flagship. Those 2 squatty-looking chunks of metal, which are anchored there off Castle Williams, are the double-turreted monitors, terrible and magnificent. Behind them lies the ram Osceola. Constance looked at him with cheap approval in her beautiful eyes. "What loads of things you know for a soldier," she said, and we all joined in the laugh which followed. Presently Louis rose with a nod to us and offered his arm to Constance, and they strolled away along the river wall. Hobart watched them for a moment and then turned to me. "Mr. Wilde was right," he said. I have found the missing tassets and left cuirassed of the princes emblazoned in a vile old junk garret in Pell Street. 99.8? I inquired with a smile. Yes. Mr. Wilde is a very intelligent man, I observed. I want to give him the credit of this most important discovery, continued Hobbit, and I intend it shall be known that he is entitled to the fame of it. He won't thank you for that, I answered sharply. Please say nothing about it. Do you know what it is worth? Said Hobbit. No, $50 perhaps. It is valued at 500, but the owner of the Princes Emblazoned will give $2,000 to the person who completes his suit. That reward also belongs to Mr. Wilde. He doesn't want it. He refuses it, I answered angrily. What do you know about Mr. Wilde? He doesn't need the money. He's rich, or will be, richer than any living man except myself. What will he care for money then? What will we care? He and I win. Win what? Demanded Hobbit, astonished. You will see, I replied, on my guard again. He looked at me narrowly, much as Dr. Archer used to, and I knew he thought I was mentally unsound. Perhaps it was unfortunate for him that he did not use the word lunatic just then. Perhaps it was fortunate for him that he did not use the word lunatic just then. I think I misread that. No, I replied to his unspoken thought. I am not mentally weak. My mind is as healthy as Mr. Wilde's. This guy thinks Mr. Wilde is insane, not a vote of confidence. I do not care to explain just yet what I have on hand, but it is an investment which will pay more than mere gold, silver, or precious stones. It will secure the happiness and prosperity of a continent, yes, a hemisphere. Oh, said Hobbit, and eventually I continued more quietly. It will secure the happiness of the whole world. And incidentally, your own happiness and prosperity as well as Mr. Wilde's. Exactly, I smiled, but I could have throttled him for taking that tone. He looked at me in silence for a while and then said very gently, Why don't you give up your books and studies, Mr. Castaigne, and take tramp among the mountains somewhere or other? You're used to be fond of fishing. Take a cast or two at a trout in the Rangeless. New York, I hate the things that I hate your geography. I don't know how to pronounce these things. I'm not from New York. I don't care for fishing anymore, I answered without a shade of annoyance in my voice. You used to be fond of everything, he continued. Athletics, yachting, shooting, riding. I have never cared to ride since my fall, I said quietly. Ah, yes, your fall, he repeated, looking away from me. I thought this nonsense had gone far enough, so I brought the conversation back to Mr. Wilde, but he was scanning my face again in a manner highly offensive to me. Mr. Wilde, he repeated. Do you know what he did this afternoon? He came downstairs and nailed a sign over the hall door next to mine. It read, Mr. Wilde, repairer of reputation, third bell. Do you know what a repairer of reputation can be? I do, I replied, suppressing the rage within. Oh, he said again. Louis and Constance came strolling by and stopped to ask if we would join them. At Harbert looked at his watch. At the same moment, a puff of smoke shot from the casemates of Castle William, and the boom of the sunset gun rolled across the water and was echoed from the highlands opposite. The flag came running down from the flagpole, and the bulges sounded on the white decks of the warships, and the first electric light sparkled out of the Jersey shore. As I turned into the city with Harbert, I heard Constance murmur something to Louis, which I did not understand, but Louis whispered, "My darling," in reply. And again, walking ahead with Harbert through the square, I heard a murmur of "sweetheart" and "my own Constance." And I knew the time had nearly arrived when I should speak of important matters with my cousin Louis. I know this is a collection of short stories. I just want to check and see how much we have to go for this short story to make sure we can complete it tonight. We can definitely okay. Reputation repair. Let's get back to, there it is, chapter 3. How deep are we in this? An hour and a half about. Okay. Give me 1 minute. Okay. Chapter 3. One morning, early in May, I stood before the steel safe of my bedroom, trying the golden jeweled crown. The diamonds flashed fire as I turned to the mirror, and heavy beaten gold burned like a halo about my head. I remembered Camilla's agonized scream and the awful words echoing through the dim streets of Carcosa. They were the last lines of the first act, and I dared not think of what followed, dared not even in the spring sunshine, there in my own room, surrounded with familiar objects, reassured by the bustle of the street and the voices of the servants in the hallway outside, for those poisoned words had dropped slowly into my heart as death's sweat drops upon a bedsheet and is absorbed. Trembling, I put the diadem from my head and wiped my forehead, but I thought of Hoster and of my own rightful ambition, and I remembered Mr. Wilde as I had last left him, his face all torn and bloody from the claws of that devil's creature, and what he said. What he said. The alarm bell in my safe began to whir harshly, and I knew my time was up. But I would not heed it, and replacing the flashing circlet upon my head, I turned defiantly to the mirror. I stood for a long time, absorbed in the changing expression of my own eyes. The mirror reflected a face which was like my own, but whiter and thin, that I hardly recognized it, and all the time I kept repeating between my clenched teeth, the day has come, the day has come. While the alarm in the safe whirred and clamored, and the diamonds sparkled and flamed above my brow, I heard a door open, but did not heed it. It was only when I saw two faces in the mirror. It was only when another face rose over my shoulder, and the other two eyes met mine. I wheeled like a flash and seized a long knife from my dressing table, and my cousin sprang back very pale, crying, "Mildred, for God's sake!" Then, as my hand fell, he said, "It is I, Louis. Don't you know me?" I stood silent. I could not have spoken for my life. He walked up to me and took the knife from my hand. "What is all this?" he inquired in a gentle voice. Are you ill? No, I replied, but I doubt if he heard me. Come, old fellow, he cried. Take off that brass crown and toddle into the study. All... Okay, I guess I'm not cleaning my glasses. Are you... Wait, come, old fellow, he cried. Take off that brass crown and toddle into the study. Are you going to a masquerade? What's all this theatrical tinsel anyway? I was glad he thought the crown was made of brass and paste. Yet I didn't like him any the better for thinking so. I let him take it from my hand, knowing it was best to humor him. He tossed the splendid diadem in the air and catching it, turned it to me smiling. Ooh. It's dear at 50 cents. What's it for? I did not answer, but took the circlet from his hands and placing it in the safe, shut the massive steel door. The alarm ceased its infernal din at once. He watched me curiously, but did not seem to notice the sudden ceasing of the alarm. He did, however, speak of the safe as a biscuit box. Fearing lest he might examine the combination, I led the way into my study. Louis threw himself on the sofa and flicked at flies with his eternal riding whip. He wore his fatigue uniform with the braided jacket and jaunty cap, and I noticed that his riding boots were all splashed with red mud. Where have you been? I inquired. Jumping mud creeks in Jersey, he said. I haven't had time. Ooh, went too far. Haven't had time to change yet. I was rather in a hurry to see you. Haven't you got a glass of something? I'm dead tired. Been in the saddle 24 hours. I gave him some brandy from my medicinal store, which he drank with a grimace. Damn bad stuff, he observed. I'll give you an address where they sell brandy that is brandy. It's good enough for my needs, I said indifferently. I use it to rub my chest with. He stared and flicked at another fly. See here, old fellow, he began. I've got something to suggest to you. It's 4 years now that you've shut yourself up here like a owl, never going anywhere, never taking any healthy exercise, never doing a damn thing but poring over those books up there on the mantelpiece. He glanced along the row of shelves. Napoleon, 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 he read. For heaven's sake, have you nothing but Napoleon here? There? I wish they were bound in gold, I said. But wait, yes, there is another book, The King in Yellow. I looked him steadily in the eye. Have you never read it? I asked. I? No, thank God, I don't want to be driven crazy. I saw he regretted his speech as soon as he had uttered it. There is only one word which I loathe more than I do lunatic, and that is the word crazy. But I controlled myself and asked him why he thought the King in Yellow was dangerous. Oh, I don't know, he said hastily. I only remember the excitement it created and the denunciations from pulpit and press. I believe the author shot himself after bringing forth this monstrosity, didn't he? I understand he is still alive, I answered. That's probably true, he muttered. Bullets couldn't kill a fiend like that. It is a book of great truths, I said. Yes, he replied, of truths which send men frantic and blast their lives. I don't care if the thing is, as you say, the very supreme essence of art. It's a crime to have it written, to have written it. But it's a crime to have written it, and I, for one, shall never open its pages. Is that what you have come to tell me? I asked. No, he said. I came to tell you that I am going to be married. I believe for a moment my heart ceased to beat, but I kept my eyes on his face. Yes, he continued, smiling happily, married to the sweetest girl on earth. Constance Haber, I said mechanically. How did you know? He cried, astonished. How did you know? He cried, astonished. I didn't know it myself until that evening last April, when we strolled down the embankment before dinner. When is it to be? I asked. Whoa. There we go. It was to have been next September, but an hour ago I dispatched a dispatch. Jesus. I'm not used to saying that with an E. An hour ago, a dispatch came ordering our regiment to the Presidio in San Francisco. Hold up, I need to adjust the light real quick. That's lighting up my face. I just realized it's actually hurting my vision. Yes. Okay. I had it on white, which was actually making it harder to read. It was to have been next September, but an hour ago a dispatch came ordering our regiment to Presidio, San Francisco. We leave at noon tomorrow. Tomorrow, he repeated. Just think, Hildred, tomorrow. I shall be the happiest fellow on that ever drew breath in this jolly world, for Constance will go with me. I offered him my hand in congratulation, and he seized and shook it like a good-natured fool he was, or pretended to be. I'm going to get my squadron as a wedding present. He rattled on. Captain and Mrs. Louis Castaigne, Hildred? Then he told me, Hildred? Sorry. Captain and Mrs. Louis Castaigne, Hildred? Then he told me where it was to be and who were to be there, and made me promise to come and be the best man. I set my teeth and listened to his boyish chatter without showing what I felt, but I was getting to the limit of my endurance, and when he jumped up and switching his spurs, still they jingled, saw he must go, I did not detain him. There's one thing I want to ask you, I said quietly. Out with it. It's promised. He laughed. I want you to meet me for a quarter of an hour's talk tonight. Of course, if you wish, he said, somewhat puzzled. Where? Anywhere in the park there. What time, Hildred? Midnight. Oh, you gonna kill him? You gonna kill him with the fucking lethal chamber? Sorry. What in the name of... he began, but checked himself and laughingly assented. I watched him go down the stairs and hurry away, his saber banging at every stride. He turned into Bleecker Street, and I knew he was going to see Constance. I gave him 10 minutes to disappear, then followed in his footsteps, taking with me the jeweled crown and silken robe embroidered with the yellow sign. When I turned into Bleecker Street and entered the doorway which bore the sign, Mr. Wilde, repairer of reputation, third bell. I saw old Harbert moving about his shop and imagined I heard Constance's voice in the parlor, but I avoided them both and hurried up the trembling stairway to Mr. Wilde's apartment. I knocked and entered without ceremony. Mr. Wilde lay groaning on the floor, his face covered with blood, his clothes torn to shreds. Drops of blood were scattered about over the carpet, which had also been ripped and frayed in the evidently recent struggle. "It's that cursed cat," he said, ceasing his groans, turning his colorless eyes to me. "She attacked me while I was asleep. I believe she will kill me yet." This was too much, so I went into the kitchen and, seizing a hatchet from the pantry, started to find the infernal beast and settle her then and there. My search was fruitless, and after a while I gave it up and came back to find Mr. Wilde squatting on his high chair by the table. He had washed his face and changed his clothes. The great furrows which the cat's claws had plowed up in his face he had filled with collodion, collagen? I don't know. And a rag hid the wound in his throat. I told him I should kill the cat when I came across her, but he only shook his head and turned to the open ledger before him. He read the name after name of the people who had come to him in regard to their reputation, and the sums he had amassed were startling. I put on the screws now and then. He explained. "One day or other, some of these people will assassinate you," I insisted. "Do you think so?" he said, rubbing his mutilated ears. One second. It was useless to argue with him, so I took down the manuscript entitled Imperial Dynasty of America. For the last time I should ever take it down in Mr. Wilde's study. I read it through, thrilling and trembling with pleasure. Then I had finished, Mr. Wilde took the manuscript and, turning to the dark passage which leads from his study to his bedchamber, called out in a loud voice, "Vance!" Then, for the first time, I noticed a man crouching there in the shadow. How I had overlooked him during my search for the cat, I cannot imagine. "Vance, come in," cried Mr. Wilde. The figure rose and crept towards us, and I shall never forget the face that he raised to mine as the light from the window illuminated it. "Vance, this is Mr. Castaigne," said Mr. Wilde. Before he had finished speaking, the man threw himself on the ground before the table, crying and gasping, "Oh God, oh my God, help me, forgive me. Oh, Mr. Castaigne, keep that man away. You cannot mean it. You are different, save me. I am broken down. I was in a madhouse, and now, when all was coming right, when I had forgotten the king in yellow, but I shall go mad again. I shall go mad." His voice died into a choking rattle, for Mr. Wilde had leapt on on him, and his right hand encircled the man's throat. When Vance fell in a heap on the floor, Wilde clambered nimbly into his chair again and rubbing his mangled ears with the stump of his hand turned to me and asked me for the ledger. I reached I reached it down from the shelf and opened it. After the moment searching among the beautifully written pages, I coughed complacently and pointed to the name Vance. Vance, Vance, he read aloud. Osgood Oswald Vance. At the sound of his name, the man on the floor raised his head and turned a convulsed face to Mr. Wilde. His eyes were injected with blood, his lips tumefied. Called April 29th, continued Mr. Wilde. Occupation cashier in the Seaforth National Bank. Has served a term of forgery at Sing Sing, from whence he was transferred to the asylum for the criminal insane. Pardoned by Governor of New York and discharged from the asylum January 19th, 1918. Reputation damaged at Sheepshead Bay. Rumors that he lives beyond his income. Reputation to be repaired at once. Retainer $1,500. Note: has embezzled sums amounting to 30,000 since March 20th, 1919. Excellent family and secured present position through uncle's influence. Father president of Seaforth Bank. I looked at him on the floor. I looked at the man on the floor. Get up, Vance, said Mr. Wilde. Get up, Vance, said Mr. Wilde in a gentle voice. Vance rose as if hypnotized. He will do as we suggest now, observed Mr. Wilde, and opening the manuscript, he read the entire history of the Imperial Dynasty of America. Then, in a kind of soothing murmur, he ran over the important points with Vance, who stood like one stunned. His eyes were so blank and vacant that I imagined he had become half-witted, and remarked it to Mr. Wilde, who replied that it was no consequence anyway. Very patiently, he pointed out to Vance that his share in the affair would be, and he seemed to understand after a while. Mr. Wilde explained the manuscript using several volumes of heraldry to substantiate the result of his researches. He mentioned the establishment of the dynasty of Carcosa, the lakes which connected Hashta, Aldebaran, and the mystery of the Hyades. He spoke of Casilda and Camilla, and sounded the cloudy depths of Deme, and the lake of Hali. The scalloped tatters of the King in Yellow must hide Yetil forever, he muttered. But I do not believe Vance heard him. Then, by degrees, he led Vance along the ramifications of the imperial family. To Ott and Thale, from Neotalba and the Phantom of Truth, to Aldones, and then tossing aside his manuscript and notes, he began the wonderful story of the last king. Fascinated and thrilled, I watched him. He threw up his head. His long arms were stretched out in magnificent gesture of pride and power, and his eyes blazed deep in their sockets like two emeralds. Vance listened stupefied, as for me, when at last Mr. Wilde had finished and pointing to me cried, "The cousin of the king!" My head swam with excitement. Controlling myself with a superhuman effort, I explained to Vance why I alone was worthy of the crown, and why my cousin must be exiled or die. I made him understand that my cousin must never marry, even after renouncing all his claims, and how that least of all he should marry the daughter of the Marquis of Avonshire and bring England into the question. I showed him a list of thousands of names which Mr. Wilde had drawn up. Every man whose name was there had received the yellow sign, which no living human being dared disregard. The city, the state, the whole land were ready to rise and tremble before pallid mask. The time had come. The people should know the son of Hashter, and the whole world bow to the black stars which hang in the sky over Carcosa. Vance leaned on the table, his head buried in his hands. Mr. Wilde drew a rough sketch of the margin of yesterday's Herald with a bit of lead pencil. It was a plan of Hobbitt's rooms. Then he wrote out the order and affixed the seal, and shaking like a palsied man, I signed my first writ of execution with my name, Hildred Rex. Mr. Wilde clambered to the floor and, unlocking the cabinet, took a long square box from the first shelf. This he brought to the table and opened. A new knife lay in the tissue paper inside, and I picked it up and handed it to Vance, along with an order and a plan of Hobbitt's apartment. Then Mr. Wilde told Vance he could go, and he went, shambling like an outcast of the slums. I sat for a while, watching the daylight fade behind the square tower of Judson Memorial Church, and finally, gathering up the manuscript and notes, took my hat and started for the door. Mr. Wilde watched me in silence. When I had stepped into the hall, I looked back. Mr. Wilde's small eyes were still fixed on me. Behind him, a shadow gathered in the fading light. When I closed the door behind me and went out into the darkening streets. Then I closed the door behind me and went out into the darkening streets. I had eaten nothing since breakfast, but I was not hungry. I, wretched, half-starved creature, who stood looking across the street at the lethal chamber, noticed me and came up to tell me a tale of misery. I gave him money, I don't know why, and he went away without thanking me. An hour later, another outcast approached me and whined his story. I had a blank bit of paper in my pocket on which was traced the yellow sign, and I handed it to him. He looked at it stupidly for a moment, and then with an uncertain glance at me, folded it with what seemed to be exaggerated care and placed it in his bosom. The electric lights were sparkling among the streets, and a new moon shone in the sky above the lethal chamber. It was tiresome waiting in the square. I wandered from the Marble Arch to the artillery stables, and back again to the lotus fountain. The flowers and the grass exhaled a fragrance which troubled me. The jet of the fountain played in the moonlight, and the musical splash of falling drops reminded me of the tinkle of chained mail in Hobbitt's shop, but it was not so fascinating, and the dull sparks of the moonlight of the water brought no such sensations of exquisite pleasure as when the sunshine played over the polished steel of the corselet of Hobbitt's knee. I watched the bats darting and turning above the water plants in the fountain basin, but their rapid, jerky flights set my nerves on edge, and I went away again to walk aimlessly to and fro among the trees. The artillery stables were dark, but in the cavalry barracks the officers' windows were brilliantly lighted, and the sally port was constantly filled with troops in fatigue, carrying straw and harness and basket filled with tin dishes. Twice the mounted sentry of the gates was changed while I wandered up and down the asphalt walk. I looked at my watch. It was nearly time. The light in the barracks went out one by one. The barrel gate was closed, and every minute or two an officer passed in through the side wicket, leaving a rattle of accoutrements and a jingle of spurs in the night air. The square had become very silent. The last homeless loiterer had been driven away by the gray-coated park policeman. The car tracks along the Wooster Street were deserted, and the only sound which broke the stillness was the stamping of the sentry horses and the ring of his saber against the saddle pommel. In the barracks, the officers' quarters were still lighted. The military servants passed and repassed before the window. Damn it. Are we live? OBS crashed for a moment there. We're live, it looks like. Let me double check here. Okay, we're good on Twitch. Sorry, I need to double check, of course, just, you know. Ooh. Let us go to my YouTube channel and double check to make sure we're still live there. Okay, we're still live everywhere. Okay. Apologies for that. Okay, well, we might be stopping after this part in the story, which is a little disappointing. I was hoping to read a little bit more today, but OBS can be a little finicky. Okay. We were around here. In the barracks of the officers' quarters, were still lighted, and the military servants passed and repassed before the bay windows. 12 o'clock sounded from the new spire of St. Francis Xavier, and at the last stroke of the sad-toned bell of the figure passed through the wicket beside the portcullis, returned the salute of the sentry, crossing the street, entered the square, and advanced towards Benedict apartment house. "Louis," I called. The man pivoted on his spurred heels and came straight towards me. "Is that you, Hildred?" "Yes, you are on time." I took his offered hand, and we strolled towards the lethal chamber. He rattled on about his wedding and the graces of Constance and their future prospects, calling my attention to his captain's shoulder straps and the triple gold arabesque on his sleeve and the fatigue cap. I believe I listened as much to the music of his spurs and saber as I did to his boyish babble. And at last we stood under the elms of the 4th Street corner of the square opposite the lethal chamber, when he laughed and asked me what I wanted with him. I motioned him a seat on a bench under the electric light, and I sat down beside him. He looked at me curiously, with the same searching glance which I hate and fear so in doctors. I felt the insult of his look, but he did not know, and I carefully concealed my feelings. Well, old chap, what can I do you for? I drew from my pocket the manuscript and notes of the Imperial Dynasty of America, looking him in the eye, and said, I will tell you, on your word, as a soldier, promise me to read this manuscript from beginning to end. Without asking me a question, promise me to read these notes in the same way, and promise me to listen to what I have to tell later. Welcome, Miko. Ooh, I remember reading this a bit ago, and what an experience it was. We're still on the first short story right now, but we are at the last part of the first short story. Ooh. Ooh, I feel like I might have to take this short story by short story because OBS a little earlier had some issues. But continuing. I promise if you wish it, he said pleasantly. Give me the paper, Hildred. He began to read, raising his eyebrows with a puzzled, whimsical air which made me tremble with suppressed anger. As he advanced, his eyebrows contracted, and his lips seemed to form the word rubbish. Then he looked slightly bored, but apparently, for my sake, read, with an attempt at interest which presently ceased to be an effort. He started when, in the closely written pages, he came to his own name, and when he came to mine, lowered the paper and looked sharply at me for a moment. But he kept his word and resumed his reading, and I let the half-formed question die on his lips unanswered. When he came to the end of the read the signature of Mr. Wilde, he folded the paper carefully and returned it to me. I handed him the notes, and he settled back, pushing his fatigue cap up to his forehead with a boyish gesture, which I remembered so well in school. I watched his face as he read, and when he finished, I took the notes with the manuscript and placed them in my pocket. When I unfolded a scroll marked with the yellow sign, he saw the sign, but he did not seem to recognize it, and I called his attention to it somewhat sharply. Well, he said, I see it. What is it? It is the yellow sign, I said angrily. Oh, that's it? Is it? Said Louis, in the flattering voice which the Dr. Archer used to employ with me and would probably have employed again had I not settled his affair for him. I kept my rage down and answered as steadily as possible. Listen, you have engaged your word. You have engaged your word. I'm listening, old chap, he replied soothingly. I began to speak very calmly. Dr. Archer, having by some means become possessed of the secret of the Imperial Succession, attempted to deprive me of my right, alleging that because of a fall from my horse 4 years ago, I had become mentally deficient. He presumed to place me under restraint in his own house in the hopes of either driving me insane or poisoning me. I have not forgotten it. I visited him last night, and the interview was final. Louis turned quite pale, but did not move. I resumed triumphantly. There are yet 3 people to be interviewed in the interest of Mr. Wilde and myself. They are my cousin Louis, Mr. Harbert, and his daughter Constance. Louis sprang to his feet and I arose also, and flung the paper marked with the yellow sign to the ground. Oh, I don't need that to tell you what I have to say, I cried with a laugh of triumph. You must renounce the crown to me. Oh, do you hear? To me. Louis looked at me with a startled air, but recovering himself, said kindly, "Of course I renounce the, what is it I must renounce?" "The crown," I said angrily. "Of course," he answered, "I renounce it. Come, old chap, I'll walk you back to your rooms with you." "Don't try any of your doctor's tricks on me," I cried, trembling with fury. "Don't act as if you think I am insane." "What nonsense," he replied. "Come, it's getting late, Hildred." "No," I shouted. "You must listen. You cannot marry. I forbid it. Do you hear? I forbid it. You shall renounce the crown, and in reward I grant you exile. But if you refuse, you shall die." He tried to calm me, but I was roused at last, and drawing my long knife, barred his way. Then I told him how they would find Dr. Archer in the cellar with his throat slit, and I laughed in his face when I thought of Vance and his knife, and and the order signed by me. "Ah, you are the king," I cried, "but I shall be king. You are to keep me from empire over all the habitable earth. I was born the cousin of a king, but I shall be king." Louis stood white and rigid before me. Suddenly a man came running up 4th Street, entered the gate of the lethal temple, traversed the path of a dozen doors at full speed, and plunged into the death chamber with the cry of one demented, and I laughed until I wept tears, for I had recognized Vance and knew that Habit and his daughter were no longer in my way. "Go," I cried to Louis. "You have ceased to be a menace. You will never marry Constance now. And if you marry anyone else in your exile, I will visit you, as I did my doctor last night. Mr. Wilde takes charge of you tomorrow." When I turned and darted into South 5th Avenue, and with a cry of terror, Louis dropped his belt and saber and followed me like the wind. I heard him close behind me at the corner of Bleecker Street, and I dashed into the doorway. Under Hobbit's sign, he cried, "Halt, or I fire!" But when he saw that I flew up the stairs, leaving Hobbit's shop below, he left me, and I heard him hammering and shouting at their door as though it were possible to arouse the dead. Mr. Wilde's door was open, and I entered crying, "It is done! It is done! Let the nations rise and look upon their king!" But I could not find Mr. Wilde, so I went to the cabinet and took the splendid diadem from its case. Then I drew on the white silk robe embroidered with yellow sign, and placed the crown upon my head. At last I was king. King by right of Hashja. King because I knew the mystery of the Hyades, and my mind had sounded the depths of the lake of Hali. I was king. The first gray penciling of dawn would raise a tempest which would shake 2 hemispheres. Then, as I stood, my every nerve pitched to the highest tension, faint with the joy and splendor of my thought, without in the dark passage a man groaned. I seized the tallow tip and sprang to the door. The cat passed me like a demon, and the tallow dip went out. But my long knife flew swifter than she, and I heard her screech, and I knew that my knife had found her. For a moment, I listened to her tumbling and thumping about in the darkness, and then, when her frenzy ceased, I lighted a lamp and raised it over my head. Mr. Wilde lay on the floor with his throat torn open. At first I thought he was dead, but as I looked, a green sparkle came into his sunken eyes. His mutilated hand trembled, and then a spasm stretched his mouth from ear to ear. For a moment, my terror and despair gave no place to hope, but as I bent over him, his eyeballs rolled clean around his head, and he died. Then, while I stood transfixed with rage and despair, seeing my crown, my empire, every hope and every ambition, my very life lying prostrate there with the dead master, they came, seized me from behind, and bound me until my veins stood out like cords, and my voice failed with paroxysms of my frenzied screams, but I still raged, bleeding and infuriated among them, and more than one policeman felt my sharp teeth. Then, when I could no longer move, they came nearer. I saw old Hobart, and behind him my cousin Louis' ghastly face. The farther away, in the corner, a woman, Constance, weeping softly. I see it now, I shrieked. You have seized the throne and the empire. Woe! Woe to you, who are crowned in the crown of the king in yellow. Editor's note. Mr. Cascane died yesterday in the asylum for the criminal insane. Well, on the bright side, he didn't get away with his mission to kill them all, but what time were we at? 2 hours and 11 minutes. The Mask. I'm going to quickly give this a look to see how long it is. I think it's about the same length. I went past The Mask, didn't I? Yes, I did. That's embarrassing. Ooh, I'm not sure how long each one of these stories is, but let me see how long. So this, I don't know if you can see it, but from here to here is that length. And then The Mask is... Ooh, a lot longer, actually. In the Dragon Court, how long is this one? You know what? I think I will read The Mask. I will read The Mask simply because it looks like it's probably going to be over an hour again. But I'm committed. And I don't know how long it would take to read each one of these stories, and right now I'm looking for The Mask, so give me a minute. I'm being a little stupid. Okay. So I'm going to read. I'm going to continue reading, and I'm going to read The Mask because I'm hoping it's short enough to fit in. And we haven't had another hiccup from OBS crashing, so I'm just going to hope it doesn't crash again. Hello! Oh, best viewers, never mind. Get out of here, bot. Get... Twitch bot, get out of here. I don't want you. It is fairly late. But that's why VODs exist. Let me get... Okay, let me get that back up. The Mask. Camilla. You, sir, should unmask. Stranger. Indeed. Casilda. Indeed, it's time we all have laid aside disguise, but you, stranger, I wear no mask. Camilla, terrified, aside to Camilla. No mask? No mask! Although I know nothing of chemistry, I listened fascinated. He picked up an Easter lily, which, Genevieve these French and like German names are killing me. Jenny, we're just gonna say Jenny because I'm too stupid to read that. Which Jenny had brought that morning from Notre Dame. Or Notre Dame, I don't know which one yet, but probably Notre Dame considering the French fixation so far, and dropped it into the basin. Instantly, the liquid lost its crystalline cleanness. For a second, the lily was enveloped in milk-white foam, which disappeared, leaving the fluid opalescent. Changing tints of orange and crimson played over the surface, and then what seemed to be a ray of pure sunlight struck through from the bottom where the lily was resting. At the same instant, he plunged his hand into the basin and drew out the flower. There is no danger, he explained, if you choose the right moment. That golden ray is the signal. He held the lily toward me, and I took it in my hand. It had turned to stone of the purest marble. You see, he said, it is without a flaw. The sculptor should reproduce it. What sculptor could reproduce it? My apologies. The marble was white as snow, but in its depths the veins of the lily was tinged with palest azure, and a faint flush lingering deep in its heart. Don't ask me the reason of that, he smiled, noticing my wonder. I have no idea why the veins in the heart are tinted, but they always are. Yesterday I tried one of Jenny's goldfish. There it is. The fish looked as if sculpted in marble, but if you held it in the light of the stone would beautifully veined with a faint blue, and from somewhere within came a rosy light like the tint which slumbers in the opal. I looked into the basin once more. It seemed filled with clearest crystal. I should have taken like an intermission before reading this, I'm now realizing. My apologies for that. I was just so enthused by the last story, getting so energized of him going mad, because I really like those. I like it whenever a point of view character just goes insane in a story, because it always gets really fun voicing them. It always gets really fun doing their mania. So let me kind of reset a little more. Fish looks... okay. If I should touch it now? I demanded. I don't know, he replied, but you had better not try. There is one thing I'm curious about, I said. And that is where the ray of sunlight came from. It looked like a sunbeam, true enough, he said, but I don't know. It always comes when I immerse any living thing. Perhaps, he continued, smiling, perhaps it is the vital spark of the creature escaping to the source from whence it came. I saw he was mocking and threatened him with a small stick, but he only laughed and changed the subject. Stay to lunch. Jenny will be here directly. I saw her going to early mass, I said, and she looked as fresh and sweet as that lily before you destroyed it. Do you think I destroyed it? Said Boris gravely. Destroyed, preserve, how can we tell? He sat in the corner of the studio near an unfinished group of fates. He leaned back on the sofa and twirling a sculptor's sizzle, squinting at his work. I just realized this is the sculptor of the fates from who died in Paris. Okay then. Okay, I did not expect it to take this turn. So all these stories, I think, are going to have an interconnection, maybe. Then again, twice is a coincidence, but we need to keep our eye out for that for the next story. What's the connecting thread, if there is one? By the way, he said, I have finished pointing up that old academic Ariadne, 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 and I suppose it will have to go to the salon. It's all I have ready this year, but after the success of Madonna brought me, I feel ashamed to send things like that. To send a thing like that. The Madonna, an exquisite marble for which Jenny had sat, had seen the sensation of last year's salon. I looked at Ariadne. It was a magnificent piece of technical work. But I agreed with Boris that the world would expect something better of him than that. Still, it was impossible now to think of finishing in time for Salon, that splendid, terrible group half shrouded in marble behind me. The fates would have to wait. We were proud of Boris Yevane. We claimed him, and he claimed us on the strength of his having been born in America, although his father was French and his mother was Russian. Everyone in Beaux Arts called him Boris, and yet there were only two of us whom he addressed in the same familiar way, Jack Scott and myself. Perhaps my being in love with Jenny had something to do with his affection for me. Not that it had ever been acknowledged. Oh, crap. So, acknowledged between us. But after all was settled, and she had told me with tears in her eyes that it was Boris who she loved, I went over to his house and congratulated him. The perfect cordiality of that interview did not deceive either of us. I always believed, although to one at least it was great comfort, I do not think he and Jenny ever spoke of the matter together, but Boris knew. Jenny was lovely. The Madonna-like purity of her face might have been inspired by Sanctus in Gounod's Mass, but I was always glad when she changed the mood for what she called her April maneuvers. She was often so as variable as an April day. In the morning grave, dignified and sweet, at noon, laughing, capricious, at evening, whatever one least expected, I preferred her so rather than in that Madonna-like tranquility which stirred the depths of my heart. I was dreaming of Jenny when he spoke again. What do you think of my discovery, Alec? I think it is wonderful. I shall make no use of it, beyond satisfying my own curiosity so far as may be, and the secret will die with me. It would be rather a blow to sculpture, would it not? We painters lose more than we ever gain by photography. Boris nodded, playing with the edge of this chisel. This new vicious discovery would corrupt the world of art. No, I shall never confide the secret of it to anyone, he said slowly. It would be hard to find anyone less informed about such phenomenon than myself. But of course I had heard of mineral springs so saturated with silica that the leaves of twigs which fell into them were turned to stone after a time. I dimly comprehended the process, how the silica replaced the vegetable matter atom by atom, and the result was a duplicate of the object in stone. This, I confess, had never interested me greatly, and as for the ancient fossils thus produced, they disgusted me. Boris, it appeared, feeling curiosity instead of repugnance, had investigated the subject and had accidentally stumbled on a solution which, attacking the immersion object, uh, sorry, attacking the immersed object with ferocity unheard of, in a second did the work of years. This was all I could make out of the strange story he had been telling me. He spoke again after a long silence. Either Ginny's gonna be, like, turned into a statue, or somebody's gonna get, like, you know, their face dunked into that water and get it, like, have a stone face. Something's gonna happen. Sorry. I am almost frightened when I think that what I have found, scientists would go mad over the discovery. It was so simple, too. I discovered itself. When I think of the formula and the new element precipitated in metallic scales. What new element? Oh, I haven't thought of naming it. I don't believe I ever shall. There are enough precious metals now in the world to cut throats over. I just realized. Ah, okay. I just realized part of my overlay was down. Cut throats over. I picked up my ears. Have you struck gold, Boris? No. Better. But see here, Alec. He laughed, starting up. You and I have all we need in this world, eh? Now, how sinister and covetous you look already. He laughed too, I laughed too, and told him I was devoured by the desire for gold, and he had better take of something else. So when Ginny came in shortly after, we had turned our backs on alchemy. Ginny was dressed in a silvery gray from head to foot. The light foreshadowing. The light glinted along the soft curves of her face, of her fair hair, as she turned her cheek to Boris. Then she saw me and turned and returned my greeting. She had never before failed to blow me a kiss from the lips of her white fingers, and I promptly complained of the omission. She smiled and held out her hand, which dropped almost before it had touched mine. She said, looking at Boris, "You must ask Alec to stay for luncheon." This also was something new. She had always asked me herself until today. "I did," said Boris shortly. "And you said yes, I hope?" She turned to me with a charming conventional smile. I might have been an acquaintance of the day before yesterday. I made her a low bow. J'avais bien. French, madame. Oh no. J'avais bien, l'honneur. Madame. I know that means, like, it would be my honor. It'd be my great honor. I can figure that much out, but I don't know how to say it. J'avais bien l'honneur, madame. But refusing to take up our usual bantering tone, she murmured in hospitable commonplace and disappeared. Boris and I looked at one another. "I had better go home, don't you think?" I asked. "Hanged if I know," he replied frankly. While we were discussing the advisability of my departure, Jenny reappeared in the doorway without her bonnet. She was wonderfully beautiful, but her color was too deep and her lovely eyes were too bright. She came straight up to me and took my arm. Luncheon is ready. Was I cross, Alec? I thought I had a headache, but I haven't. Come here, Boris. And she slipped her other arm through his. Alec knows that after you, there is no one in the world who I like as well as I like him. So, if he sometimes feels snubbed, I won't hurt him. A la bonne heure, I cried. Who says there is no thunderstorms in April? Are you ready? Chanted Boris. Aye, ready. And arm in arm. I ready, and arm in arm, we raced into the dining room, scandalizing the servants. After all, we were not so much to blame. Jenny was 18, Boris was 23, and I was quite 21. Don't tell Twitter that, they'll cancel you. Anyways. Some work that I was doing about this time on the decorations... Sorry, Chapter 2. Some work that I was doing about this time on the decorations of Jenny's boudoir. That's the word. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I know I've seen the word boudoir before. Decorations of Jenny's boudoir, sorry, I've heard the word boudoir, kept me constantly at quaint little hotel in Rue Sainte-Cécile. Boris and I had those days labored hard, but as we pleased, this which was fitfully, and we all three with Jack Scott idled a great deal together. One quiet afternoon, I had been wandering alone over the house, examining curious, prying into odd corners, bringing out sweet meat and cigars from the strange hiding places. And at last I stopped in the bathing room. Boris, all over clay, stood there washing his hands. The room was built of rose-colored marble, excepting the floor, which was tessellated in rose and gray. In the center was a square pool sunken below the surface of the floor. Steps led down into it, sculptured pillars supported a frescoed ceiling. A delicious marble Cupid appeared to have just alighted on his pedestal at the upper end of the room. The whole interior was Boris's work and mine. Boris, in his working clothes of white canvas, scraped the traces of clay and red modeling wax from his handsome hands and cooked over his... Oh, I can't read that word. Over his shoulder with Cupid. I know what that word is, but when I say it, it sounds like I'm... No, no. Coquetted. Whatever, I just... Ooh, I see you, he insisted. I don't try to look the other way and pretend not to see me. So, I'm gonna start that over. I see you, he insisted. Don't try to look the other way and pretend not to see me. You know who made you, little humbug. It was always my role to interpret Cupid's sentiments in these conversations. And when my turn came, I responded in such a manner that Boris seized my arm and dragged me towards the pool, declaring he would duck me. Next instant, he dropped my arm and turned pale. Good God, he said. I forgot the pill is full of solution. I shivered a little and dryly advised him to remember better where he had stored the precious liquid. In heaven's name, why do you keep In heaven's name, why do you keep a small lake of that gruesome stuff here of all places? I asked. I want to experiment on something large, he replied. On me, for instance? That came too close for jesting, but I do want to watch the action of the solution on a more highly organized living body. There is that big white rabbit, he said, following me into the studio. Jack Scott, wearing a paint-stained jacket, came wandering in, appropriate to all the oriental sweetmeats he could lay his hands on, looted a cigarette case, and finally he and Boris disappeared together to visit the Luxembourg Gallery, where a new silver bronze by Rodin and a landscape of Monet's were claiming the exclusive attention of the artistic France. I went back to the studio and resumed my work. It was a Renaissance screen, which Boris wanted me to paint for Jenny's boudoir. But the small boy was unwillingly dawdling through the series of poses for it. Today refused all bribes to be good. He never rested an instant in the same position, and inside of 5 minutes I had as many different outlines of the little beggar. Are you posing or are you executing a song and dance, my friend? I inquired. Whichever monsieur please, he replied with an angelic smile. Of course I dismissed him for a day, and of course I paid for the full time, that being the day we spoil our models. Ooh, went too far. After the young imp had gone, I made a few perfunctory daubs at my work, but was so thoroughly out of humor that it took me the rest of the afternoon to undo the damage I had done. So at last I scraped my palette, struck my brushes in a bowl of black soap, and strolled into the smoking room. I really believe that, excepting Jenny's apartment, no room in the house was so free from the perfume of tobacco as this one. Oh, accepting. Usually it's accepting in modern English, but accepting also works. It keeps getting me. Ooh. It was queer chaos of odds and ends, hung with threadbare tapestry. A sweet-toned old spinet in good repair stood by the window. There were stands of weapons, some old and dull, others bright and modern, festoons of Indian and Turkish armor over the mantel, 2 or 3 good pictures, and a pipe rack. It was here that we used to come for new sensations in smoking. I doubt if any type of pipe ever existed which was not represented in the rack. When we had selected one, we immediately carried it somewhere else and smoked it, for the place was on the whole more gloomy and less inviting than any in the house. But this afternoon, the twilight was soothing. The rugs and skins on the floor looked brown and soft and drowsy. And the big couch was piped with cushions. I found my pipe and curled up there for an unaccustomed smoke in the smoking room. I had chosen one with a long, flexible stem, and lighting it fell to dreaming. After a while it went out, but I did not stir. I dreamed, and I presently fell asleep. I awoke to the saddest music I have ever heard. The room was quite dark. I had no idea what time it was. A ray of moonlight silvered one edge of the old spinet, and polished wood seemed to exhale the sound as perfume floats above a box of sandalwood. Someone rose in the darkness and came away weeping quietly, and I was fool enough to cry out, "Jenny!" Ooh, I need to refill my water. Excuse the pause real quick. She dropped at my voice, and I had time to curse myself while I made a light and tried to raise her from the floor. She shrank away with a murmur of pain. She was very quiet and asked for Boris. I carried her to the divan and went to look for him. He was not in the house, and the servants were gone to bed. Perplexed and anxious, I hurried back to Jenny. She lay there where I had left her, looking very white. "I can't find Boris nor any of the servants," I said. I know, she answered faintly. "Boris has gone up with Mr. Scott. I did not remember when I sent you for him just now. But he can't be back in that case before tomorrow afternoon. And are you hurt? Did I frighten you into falling? What an awful fool I am, but I was only half awake. Boris thought you had gone home before dinner. Do please excuse us for letting you stay here all this time. I do have a long nap. I have had a long nap," I laughed, so sound that I did not know whether I was still asleep or not when I found myself staring at a figure that was moving towards me and called out your name. "Have you been trying the old spinet? You must have played very softly." I would tell 1,000 more lies worse than that one to see the look of relief that came into her face. She smiled adorably and said in her natural voice, "Alec, I tripped on the wolf's head, and I think my ankle is sprained. Please call Marie, and then go home." I did as she bade, and left her there when the maid came in. Chapter 3. At noon the next day, when I called, I found Boris walking restlessly about his studio. Jenny is asleep just now," he told me. "The sprain is nothing, but why should she have such a high fever? Because she drank the water. The doctor can't account for it, or else he will not," he murmured. "Jenny has a fever?" I asked. "I should say so, and has actually been a little light-headed in intervals all night. The idea, gay little Jenny without a care in the world. She keeps saying her heart's broken and she wants to die." My own heart stood still. Boris leaned against the door in his studio, looking down, his hands in his pockets, his kind, keen eyes clouded. A new line of trouble drawn over the mouth's good mark that made the smile. The maid had orders to summon him. The instant Jenny opened her eyes, he waited, and Boris, growing restless, wandered about, fussing with modeling wax and red clay. Suddenly, he started for the next room. "Come and see my rose-colored bath full of death," he cried. "Is it death?" I asked to humor his mood. "You are not prepared to call it life, I suppose," he answered, and he plucked a solitary goldfish swimming in twisting out of its globe. "We'll send this one after the other, wherever that is," he said. There was a feverish excitement in his voice. A dull weight of fever lay on my limbs and on my brain as I followed him to the fair crystal pool, uh, with its pink-tinted sides, and dropped the creature in, falling. Its scales flashed with a hot orange gleam. In its angry twistings and contortions, the moment it struck the liquid, it became rigid and sank heavily to the bottom. Then came the milky foam, the splendid hues radiating on the surface, and then the shaft of pure serene light broke through the from seemingly infinite depths. Boris plunged his hand and drew out the exquisite marble thing, blue-veined, rose-tinted, and glistening in the opalescent drops. "Child's play," he muttered, and looked wearily, longingly at me, as if I could answer such questions. But Jack Scott came in and entered into the game, as he called it, with ardor. Nothing would do but to try experiment on the white rabbit, then and there. I was willing that Boris should find distraction from his cares, but I hated to see life go out of warm, living creatures that I declined to be present. Oh, went too far. Picking up a book at random, I sat down in the studio to read. Alas, I found The King in Yellow. After a few moments, which seemed ages, I was putting it away with a nervous shudder when Boris and Jack came in, bringing their marbled rabbit. At the same time, the bell rang above, and a cry came from the sick room. Boris was gone like a flash, and the next moment he called, "Jack, run for the doctor. Bring him back with you. Alec, come here." I went and stood at the door. A frightened maid came out in the haste and ran away to fetch some remedy. Jenny, sitting bolt upright, with crimson cheeks and glittering eyes, babbled incessantly and resisted Boris's gentle restraint. He called me to help. At my first touch, she sighed and sank back, closing her eyes, and then was, as we still bent above her, she opened them again, looked straight into Boris's face, poor fever-crazed girl, and told her secret. At the same instant, our three lives turned into new channels. The bond that held us so long together snapped forever. A new bond was forged in its place. For she had spoken my name, and as the fever tortured her, her heart poured out its load of hidden sorrow. Amazed and dumb, I bowed my head while my face burned like a live coal, and the blood surged into my ears, stupefying me with its clamor. Incapable of movement, incapable of speech, I listened to her feverish words. An agony of shame and sorrow. I could not silence her. I could not look at Boris. Then I felt an arm upon my shoulder, and Boris turned a bloodless face to mine. "It is not your fault, Alec. Don't grieve so. She loves you." But he could not finish, as the doctor stepped swiftly into the room, saying, "A fever!" I seized Jack Scott and hurried him to the street, saying Boris would rather be alone. We crossed the streets to our own apartment, that night, seeing I was going to be ill too. He went for the doctor again. The last thing I recollect with any distinctness was hearing Jack say, "For heaven's sake, doctor, What ails him to hear a face like that? And I thought and I thought of the sorry, and I thought of the king in yellow and the pallid mask. I was very ill. I was very ill, for the strain of 2 years which I have endured since that fatal May morning when Jenny murmured, "I love you, but I think I love Boris best," told on me at last. I had never imagined that I could become more than I could endure, outwardly tranquil. I had deceived myself, although the inward battle raged night after night, and I, lying alone in my room, cursed myself for rebellious thoughts unloyal to Boris, unworthy of Jenny. The morning always brought relief, and I returned to Jenny and my dear Boris with a heart washed clean by the tempest of the night. Never in word or deed or thought while with them had I betrayed my sorrow, even to myself. Oh, greetings and salutations to you. Sorry, your chat was perfectly blocked. I'm so sorry if you've been there for if you've been there for a while, but greetings and salutation to you, WhimzieCat. Ooh. I'm just gonna close. I was gonna close Kick so it doesn't block Twitch chat. Ooh. And the mask of self-deception was no longer a mask for me. It was a part of me. Night lifted it, laying bare the stifled truth below, but there was no one to see except myself. And when the day broke, the mask fell back again on its own accord. These thoughts passed through my troubled mind as I lay sick, but they were hopelessly entangled with visions of white creatures, heavy as stone, crawling about in Boris's basin, of the wolf's head on the rug, foaming and snapping at Jenny, who lay smiling beside it. I thought too of the king in yellow, wrapped in the fantastic colors of his tattered mantle, and the bitter cry of Casilda, "Not upon us, O king, not upon us." Feverishly I struggled to put it from me, but I saw the lake of Hali, thin and blank, without a ripple or a wind to stir it, and I saw the towers of Carcosa behind the moon. Aldebaran, the Hyades, Allah Hastur, glided through the cloud rifts which fluttered and flapped as they passed, like the scalloped tatters of the king in yellow. Among all these, one sane thought persisted. It never wavered, no matter what else was going on in my disordered mind. And my chief reason for existing was to meet some requirement of Boris and Jenny. What this obligation was, its nature was never clear. Sometimes it seemed to be protection, sometimes support through a great crisis. Whatever it seemed to be for the time, its weight rested only on me, and I was never so ill or so weak that I did not respond with my whole soul. There were always crowds of faces about me, mostly strange, but a few I recognized, Boris among them. Afterward they told me that this could not have been, but I know that once at least he bent over me. It was only a touch, a faint echo of his voice. But the clouds settled back on my senses and I lost him. But he did stand there and bend over me once at least. At last, one morning, I awoke to find the sunlight falling across my bed and Jack Scott reading beside me. I had not strength enough to speak aloud, neither could I think, much less remember, but I could smile feebly as Jack's eyes met mine, and when he jumped up and asked eagerly if I wanted anything, I could whisper, "Yes, Boris." Jack moved to the head of my bed and leaned down to arrange my pillow. I did not see his face, but he answered heartily, "You must wait, Alec. You are too weak to see even Boris." Jack has like a different voice every time I go to him, but whatever. I waited, and I grew strong. In a few days, I was able to see whom I would not meanwhile had thought and remembered. From the moment when all the past grew clear again in my mind, I never doubted what I should do when the time came, and I felt sure that Boris would have resolved upon the same course so far as he was concerned. For, as for what pertained to me alone, I knew he would see that also I did. He would see what all that I knew he would see that also as I did. I no longer asked for anyone. I never inquired why no message came from them. Sorry. One moment. Apologies, I bumped into something. Let me make sure I don't lose my place during this sudden intermission. Okay, I no longer asked. Head back. I no longer asked for anyone. I never inquired why no message came from them, why during the week I lay there waiting and growing stronger. I never heard their name spoken, preoccupied with my own searching for the right way, and with my feeble but determined fight against despair. I simply acquiesced in Jack's reticence, taking for granted that he was afraid to speak of them, lest I should turn unruly and insist on seeing them. Meanwhile, I said over and over to myself, how would it be when life began again for us all? We would take up our relations exactly as they were before Jeannie fell ill. Boris and I would look into each other's eyes, and there would be neither rancor nor cowardice nor mistrust in that glance. I would be with them again for a little while in the dear intimacy of their home, and then, without pretext or explanation, I would disappear from their lives forever. Boris would know. Jenny, the only comfort was that she would never know. It seemed, as I thought it would, that I had found the meaning of that sense of obligation which had persisted all through my delirium, and the only possible answer to it. So when I was quite ready, I beckoned Jack to me one day and said, "Jack, I want Boris at once, and take my dearest greetings to Jenny." When at last he made me understand that they were both dead, I fell into a wild rage and tore all my little convalescent strength to atoms. I raved and cursed myself into a relapse from which I crawled forth some weeks afterwards, a boy of 21 who believed that his youth was gone forever. I seemed to be past the capability of further suffering, and one day when Jack handed me a letter and the keys to Boris's house, I took them without tremor and asked him to tell me all. It was cruel of me to ask him, but there was no help for it, and I leaned warily on his thin hands, and to reopen the wound which would never entirely heal, he began very quietly. Alec, unless you have a clue that I know nothing about, you will not be able to explain any more than I what has happened. I suspect that you would rather not hear these details, but you must learn them, else I would spare you the relation. God knows I wish I could be spared the telling. I shall use few words. That day, when I left you in the doctor's care and came back to Boris, I found him working on the fates. Janie, he said, was sleeping under the influence of drugs. She had been quite out of her mind, he said. He kept on working, not talking anymore, and I watched him. Before long, I saw that the third figure of the group, the one looking straight ahead, out over the world, bore his face. Not as you ever saw it, but as it looked then and to the end. This is one thing for which I should like to find an explanation, but I never shall. Well, he worked and I watched him in silence. He worked and I watched him in silence, and he went on the way until nearly midnight. Then we heard the door open and shut sharply, and a swift rush in the next room. Boris sprang through the door, and I followed, but we were too late. She lay in the bottom of the pool, her hands across her breast. Then Boris shot himself through the hot. Jack stopped speaking. Drops of sweat stood under his eyes, and his thin cheeks twitched. Hello, Oi. Ooh, King in Yellow, more like King in Pissing. Ooh. I carried Boris to his room. Then I went back and let that hellish fluid out of the pool, and turning on all the water, washed the marble clean of every drop. When at length I dared descend the steps, I found her lying there as white as snow. At last, when I had decided what was best to do, I went into the laboratory and first emptied the solution in the basin into the waste pipe. Then I poured the contents of every jar and bottle after it. There was wood in the fireplace, so I built a fire, and breaking the locks of Boris's cabinet, I burnt every paper, notebook, and letter that I found there. With a mallet for the studio, I smashed to pieces all the empty bottles, and then loading them into the coal scuttle, I carried them to the cellar and threw them over the red-hot bed of the furnace. 6 times I made the journey, and at last not a vestige remained of anything which might again aid in seeking for the formula which Boris had found. Then at last I dared call the doctor. He is a good man, and together we struggled to keep it from the public. Without him, I never could have succeeded. At last we got the servants paid and sent away into the country, where old Rosier keeps them quiet. This with stories of Boris and Janie travels in distant lands, from whence They will not return for years. We buried Boris. We buried Boris in the little cemetery of Sevres, and the doctor's a good creature and knows when to pity a man who can bear no more. He gave his certificate of heart disease and asked no questions of me. Then lifting his head from his hands, he said, "Open the letter, Alec. It is for us both." I tore it open. It was Boris's will, dated a year before. He left everything to Jenny, and in case of her dying childless, I was to take control of the house in the Rue Saint-Cécile, and Jack Scott the management of Ept. On our deaths, the property reverted to his mother's family in Russia, with the exception of the sculpted marbles executed by himself. These he left to me. The page blurred under our eyes, and Jack got up and walked to the window. Presently, he turned and sat down. I dreaded to hear what he was going to say, but he spoke with the same simplicity and gentleness. Jenny lies before Madonna in the marble room. Madonna bends tenderly above her, and Jenny smiles back into the calm face that never have been except for her. His voice broke, and he grasped my hand, saying, "Courage, Alec." Next morning, he left for Ept to fulfill his trust. Taking a drink before the next chapter? I told you it was foreshadowing when it said that she was in a gray dress, though, that she was going to get turned into a statue. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The same evening I took the keys and went into the house I had known so well. Everything was in order, but the silence was terrible. Though I went twice to the doctor of the marble room, I could not force myself to enter. I was beyond my strength. I went into the smoking room and sat down before the spinet. A small lace handkerchief lay on the keys, and I turned away, choking. It was plain I could not stay, so I locked every door, every window, and the 3 front and back gates, and went away. Next morning, outside, I lost my place. Outside, packed my valet, and leaving him in the charge of my apartment, I took the Orient Express for Constantinople. During the 2 years that I wandered through the East, at first in our letters we never mentioned Jenny and Boris, but gradually their names crept in. I recollect particularly a passage on Jack's letters replying to one of mine. What are you well, Jack's voice. Okay, I'm just give me 1 minute. What you tell me of seeing Boris bending over you while you lay ill, and feeling his touch on your face, and hearing his voice, of course troubles me. This that you describe must have happened at a fortnight after he died. I say to myself that you were dreaming, that it was part of your delirium, but the explanation does not satisfy me, nor would it you. Toward the end of the 2nd year, a letter came from Jack to me in India, so unlike anything that I had ever known of him, and I decided to return at once to Paris. He wrote, "I am well, and I sell all my pictures as artists do who have no need of money. I have not a care of my own, but I am more restless than if I had. I am unable to shake off the strange anxiety about you. It is not apprehension, it is rather a breathless expectancy of what God knows. I can only say it is wearing me out. Nights I dream always of you and Boris. I can never recall anything afterwards, but I wake in the morning with my heart beating, and all day with and all day the excitement increases until I fall asleep at night to recall the same experience. I am quite exhausted by it and have determined to break up this morbid condition. I must see you. Shall I go to Bombay, or will you come to Paris? I telegraphed him to expect me by the next steamer. When we met, I thought he had changed very little. I, he insisted, looked in splendid health. It was good to hear his voice again. And as we sat and chatted about what life still held for us, we felt that it was a pleasant to be alive in the bright spring weather. We stayed in Paris together a week, and then I went for a week to Ept with him. But first, we went to the cemetery of Service where Boris lay. Need to take a drink. Shall we place the fates in a little grove above him? Jack asked, and I answered, I think only the Madonna should watch over Boris's grave. But Jack was none the better for my homecoming, the dreams of which he could not retain even the least definite outline continued, and he said that at times the sense of breathless expectancy was suffocating. You see, I do you harm and not good, I said. Try to change without me. So he started alone for a ramble among the Channel Islands, and I went back to Paris, but not yet into Boris's house. No, now mine since my return, but I knew it must be done. It had been kept in order by Jack, there were servants there, so I gave up my own apartment and went there to live. Instead of the agitation I had feared, I found myself able to paint there in tranquility. I visited all the rooms, all but one. I could not bring myself to enter the marbled room where Jenny lay, and yet I felt the longing growing daily to look upon her face, to kneel beside her. One April afternoon, I lay dreaming in the smoking room, just as I had lain 2 years before, and mechanically I looked among the tawny eastern rugs from the for the wolfskin. At last I distinguished the pointed ears and the flat, cruel head, and I thought of my dream where I saw Jenny lying beside it. The helmet still hung against the threadbare tapestry, among them the old Spanish morion, which I remembered Jenny had once put on when we were amusing ourselves with the ancient bitch of mail. I turned my head to the spinet. Every yellow key seemed eloquent of her caressing hand, and I rose, drawn by the strength of my life's passion, to the sealed door of the marbled room. The heavy door swung inward under my trembling hand. Sunlight poured through the window, tipping with gold the wings of Cupid, and lingered like nimbus over the brows of Madonna. her tender face bent in compassion over a marbled form so exquisitely pure that I knelt inside myself, signed myself. Janine lay in the shadow under Madonna, and yet, through her white arms, I saw a pale azure vein, and beneath her softly clasped hands, the folds of her dress were tinged with a rose, as if from the faint warm light within her breast. Bending with the breaking heart, I touched the marble drapery with my lips, then crept back into the silent house. A maid came and brought me a letter, and I sat down in a little conservatory to read it. But as I was about to break the seal, seeing the girl lingering, I asked her what she wanted. She stammered something about a white rabbit and that had been caught in the house, and asked what should be done with it. I told her to let it loose in the walled garden behind the house and opened my letter. Oh shit. That might be the rabbit coming back to life that was turned to stone. I told her to let it loose and I opened my letter. It was from Jack. But so incoherent that I thought he must have lost his reason. It was nothing but a series of prayers to me not to leave the house until he could get back. He could not tell me why. There were dreams he had. He could explain nothing, but he was sure that I must not leave the house in Rue Saint-Cécile. Cecile. As I finished reading, I raised my eyes and saw the same maidservant standing in the doorway holding a glass dish in which 2 goldfish were swimming. Put them back in the tank and tell me what you mean by... Put them back in the tank and tell me what you mean by interrupting me. With a half-suppressed whimper, she emptied water and fish into an aquarium at the end of the conservatory and turned to me, asked my permission to leave my service. She said people were playing tricks on her, evidently with the design of getting her into trouble. The marble rabbit had been stolen and a live one had been brought into the house. The 2 beautiful marbled fish were gone, and she had found those common things flopping on the dining floor. I assured her and sent her away, saying I would look about myself. I went into the studio. There was nothing there but my canvases and some casts, except the marble of the Eastern Lily. I saw it on the table across the room. Then I strode angrily over to it, but the flower I lifted from the table was fresh and fragile and filled the air with perfume. Then suddenly I comprehended and sprang through the hallway to the marble room. The doors flew open, the sunlight streamed into my face, and through it, in a heavenly glory, the Madonna smiled as Janine lifted her flushed face from her marble couch, and that was a terrible misreading, couch, and opened her sleepy eyes. Ooh. I think with that is actually a good place to end it with a 3-hour stream. We read The Mask, which turned out to be a story of a guy figuring out suspended animation. I was not expecting that. We've read The Mask, and we have read... What was this one called, actually? The Repairer of Reputations. Ooh. Which were both pretty nice. So I'm a little curious about the Mask. I want to reread that on my own time. But those are really nice, and we're going to continue these tomorrow, where we will be reading... Let's go down. In the Court of the Dragoon, which will be... Then we will read the Yellow Sign. Those both... Okay, maybe the Yellow Sign isn't as short. And we have the time. I don't know how long these are going to be, but if the Yellow Sign... If we get done with it by like 2.5 hours or 2 hours, then we're going to the... I can't read that because that's French. But I'm really enjoying this. And I was hoping it'd only be a 2-part stream, but it looks like we're going to have to go into next week, or I'm going to have to stream on Friday as well. I'm not quite sure yet. But we will be back with more of the King in Yellow tomorrow. But 3 hours, I think, is long enough for now. Ooh. Let me look for a place to send you beautiful people off to, though, before we end stream. Ooh, let me quickly do this. Okay, sorry about that. Oh, ooh, what's happened? There we go. Sorry. Ooh, I just changed the text size so I can more easily navigate the browser. Oh my god, everything is so small now. Oh goodness, the text is all so small now. Wait, no. Let's keep this up just so there's something visually there. Okay, let me find a place though to link you beautiful, beautiful people out to. I'm gonna link you out to Powerlines, even though I've done that recently already. But I'm going to link you out to Powerlines on YouTube because recently he played a game inspired by the King in Yellow last night. So if you want to check that out, you can after you check out his current stream. So there is Powerlines for YouTube. And on Twitch, let me find a place to send you beautiful people off to. Ooh. I don't even know if anyone's here. It's so late. Ooh, but let me find a place to link you off out to. A friend of Airy. Ooh, I'm gonna send you to Tiki. Ooh. Who is a friend of Airy, which is good enough for me. So I hope you have a great day, a wonderful life. Well, actually, a great night. I hope the rest of your night goes well. You have wonderful sleep. And we will be back tomorrow at probably a similar time to continue with the Court of the Dragoons. But until then, have a great day and a wonderful life. And don't lose your head.
Kendall, don't dox me on stream, please. I didn't want to say where.
Oh, also we're doing Helldivers on Friday with Atya and the Captain.
I purposely have not.
It's very late and my brain's a little fried, but that's all.
I don't know how to delete it. How do I delete someone's message in my...
Oh, wait, no. Shit. I was supposed to say this before all that. I was supposed to say this before the closer. Darn it. If you're new, follow along for more, whether you're on Twitch or YouTube, through a subscription and or follow where applicable.
How do I delete your one message?
And I hope you liked this stream as much as I like doing it. I'm very tired because it's very late. Bye-bye, everybody. For the 3rd time.